Hello, viewers of our Stop the Destruction of the World program. We are here with you once again with our conscientization campaign about the psychosocial causes which are destroying humanity and our planet. It is known as integral psychoanalysis or analytical trilogy, a science that was created by psychoanalyst Norberto Keppe. This science provides us with the psychological resources to examine our ecological and social problems. Why is the human being destroying nature? Why does humanity create wars? Why do we have social injustice, hunger, racism, prejudice, fanaticism? And why is science so outdated? Our medical field often doesn't have the ability to solve the simplest ailments. Medicine today is a very mutilating way to deal with disease, even the physical diseases we are coping with today. But through integral science, we have taken a big step forward. One of the things I would like to deal with today is the economy. How does the human mind, our psychological illness, affect the economic systems that we have? Keppe has discovered that one of the main sources of illness, if not the most important source, is envy. Megalomania, theomania, and arrogance. And this envy and megalomania seriously affects economic theories. In an inverted way, for example, capitalism puts profit above everything else. We give more value to capital than to human beings. This is a megalomaniac, inverted, and envious idea of ours. It's selfish to want everything for oneself. The communist system simply transfers the sick attitude to the bureaucrats of the state. In his studies of the mind, Keppe has discovered that badly structured work or bad economic laws can cause people to become ill. Identified two fundamental issues, two very sick practices that cause anxiety and disease. One is speculation. We are inverted in seeing capital as the source of wealth, not labor. Our society puts labor at the service of capital instead of the other way around. This has led to a gross enlargement of the financial institutions and a deterioration in production, mainly for those things related to necessities and quality. The second point that Keppe highlights as evidence of the sick economy is exploitation. Because of envy and megalomania, people become enemies of their brothers and neighbors, and this leads to exploitation of their fellow men. This has always existed. So how do we begin to have some control over these sick tendencies? What must we do to stop owners from exploiting or humiliating employees? And at the same time, how to prevent employees from envying their bosses and sabotaging their companies? Keppe has created what he calls a triological economic model, or a triological company model, where the main goal is to work with exactly these problems. These models are explained very well in the book, Liberation of the People. Work and capital here, and also sociopathology. Both of these contain very important studies about social pathology and how to work with this. Dr. Keppe, I don't know if you want to talk about this now, but I think this one is really wonderful. This concept here is of the technique of consciousness of errors that you developed in your triological economy.
Well, I would like to first talk a little about the origin of psychoanalysis, because many people today don't give value to Sigmund Freud's work because of the errors he made in relation to his sexual theories. And so it is thought that his work doesn't deserve much consideration, but it certainly does. The most important discovery in psychotherapy comes from Sigmund Freud when he perceived that the big problem of humanity was coming from the issue of hypocrisy. He based himself in the German philosopher Schopenhauer, who had based himself in Kant, who said the human being was very hypocritical because deep down inside he has an intention, but in society he shows himself to be something else. So the human being never shows who he is, not only to others, but mainly to himself. Robert Louis Stevenson was an English writer who worked with this. He showed in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde how a person would turn into a monster every time he took a potion. This is interesting because this potion he made turned himself into a monster. And look at how the modern drugs today are turning the human being into a monster. Adolescents, for example, who are already taking drugs, start turning themselves bit by bit into something that is even physically really ugly, and much more so psychologically. So look now, let's take a look at this photo. Here he is at the moment of transformation, turning from the doctor, whose name is Jekyll, that is, the one who sees, who is conscious. And consciousness is sanity. And Mr. Hyde is the one who is hidden. The verb to hide in English, of course, means to conceal. Those who conceal because of something evil. That is, when a person conceals his bad intentions, he transforms himself into a real monster. So you see, Freud's discovery of hypocrisy is extremely important because it even coincides with Christian teaching, which shows that hypocrisy is a terrible thing. Christ said this, that many people are like tombs. On the outside, the tombs are beautiful, but on the inside, there is only decay and rot. So, if an individual has evil intentions within himself, and he doesn't perceive this, what happens? This individual transforms himself into a very sick person. This is called inversion. And what is inversion? As the human being is now born with a lot of envy, arrogance, etc., he has become the contrary to what he should be. Take a look at a chart here. Let's see, look at this. Examples of inversion. What happens as a result of inversion? Let's see. In command, the child who tells his parents what to do actually bosses them around. In older days, of course, parents spanked their children, and in Europe they still do this. At Euro Disney, we saw many times parents spanking their young children, which is not the case here. If a child misbehaves, particularly adolescents, he has to be oriented. But today, I was reading in a magazine that the greatest evils of the modern world are psychology and the media. It's the media that transmits these wrong ideas to the world. That, for example, the child should never be frustrated. On the contrary, Freud said that what is difficult is for the person to accept frustration. If a child gets everything he wants, all his whims are met, then he will want the same treatment as an adult. And of course, as he's not going to be treated in this way, he enters into a conflict with society. Thus all the rebellion, social restlessness, all these types of problems. Instead of the person going to work and progressing, he begins fighting with people at work and those who are progressing. So the first mistake is when the child dominates the parents. Taking a look again at the diagram, Later on, you have students dominating schools. Can you see how absurd things are nowadays? As the majority of schools are privately owned, the owners of these schools don't treat the students as if they were there to learn. The student body and those who teach. They don't act as if the students are there to learn, but rather the student must be protected in order to guarantee the income of the school. And these things are now being commented upon in today's magazines. So, the people who really direct the schools are the students. It's a process of inversion, the inferior dominating the superior. Many teachers give up, even from giving classes. They retire or simply stop teaching due to the danger they feel of being confronted by students who want to control their teachers. You see, this is an inversion. In third place, take a look at what an inversion is. The employee telling the company what he wants. Just look at the amount of laws there are nowadays that protect those who work. The number of laws is so enormous, so absurd, that employers don't want the responsibility of having these people work for them anymore. They prefer people who are freelancers, those who have their own companies, because they don't want to pay for employee retirement, pay for pensions, pay for this and that other thing. And after a few years, they know the employee will turn against them in order to extract some sort of compensation, unjustly, because the large majority of people think that work is a heavy burden and that they should earn money without working. Looking once again at the diagram, in obedience, that is, in what is right, what should happen is that the parents should be telling their children what to do. Of course, the teachers directing the students, and the leaders and directors should be directing through just laws. And if things aren't like this, then look at the consequences. Diseases manifest themselves, and the social structure crumbles. And so there is individual and social crises. And you can notice that this great crisis that exists in the world today is due to this inversion of values. The inferior is up there on top, and the superior is down below. We'll be right back.
Even if we don't have a lot of consciousness, we can perceive that life is divine. We live in transcendence, whether we accept it or not. We still live in an earthly paradise, except we don't accept it. In fact, we attack what is most beautiful, good, and real. Consciousness of our envy and inversion will make it possible for us to return to this paradise we've abandoned. We don't need to build it. We just need to accept it. The Stop the Destruction of the World Association was created to bring about exactly this consciousness. We are working to return the world to goodness. Join us.
O ser humano foi criado para ser bom, bonito, verdadeiro, foi criado para ter caridade, tratar os outros bem. Então, o fato que nós vemos tantas pessoas feias, estúpidas, burras, desonestas aqui na Terra é sinal que alguma coisa não está indo bem com o ser humano. Que o ser humano está atacando todas essas coisas boas que existem dentro dele. Todas as guerras, as desigualdades, as corrupções, perversões, crianças passando fome, tudo isso é só reflexo do que está acontecendo com o ser humano, no interior dele. Então, é muito importante a conscientização dessa atitude, da inveja, essa atitude de ir contra o que é bom para poder ter uma solução dessa situação.
This program is called Stop the Destruction of the World because our intention is to stop this destruction of humanity. Even if it's disagreeable to some of you watching on TV, I haven't found another way, at least in my scientific work, any other way to escape the destruction that is going on. Because we're not only seeing the destruction of the air and sea, not only the destruction of nature, human beings themselves are attacking each other more and more through kidnapping, crime, delinquency, theft, and the like. And this has to come to a stop, because humanity has reached a critical point, as it is said, at the end of its rope. Either humanity gets its act together and follows the right path, or it will sink. Now, when I talk about getting on the right path, I mean that humanity has to become conscious. We have to see that we aren't the way we think we are, that the human being isn't generous, he isn't good. We had these qualities in our being way before, in the beginning of creation.
Dr. Kepi, I think that this is the most difficult point to deal with in psychotherapy and even more in society. Because of inversion, people think that anyone who tells them the truth or points out a defect is attacking them. If a person is very aggressive or lazy, is creating difficulties at work, and if a father, mother, colleague, or even an employee says, "You have this problem," the person feels attacked, as if it were an aggression. And the person's consciousness registers this as a bad thing, as an aggressive thing.
Exactly.
And the person defends himself, resists, and fights back, so as not to admit he has problems.
People generally think that being shown their defect is censorship. No, it isn't. When a person doesn't want to see his defect, this is censorship. Just take a look here, the etiology of neurosis. Firstly, the cause of illness is related to an artificial conduct. The person doesn't want to feel or live what he is. He wants to feel and live outside his true existence. Let's see now the etiology of illness. It's a denial, omission, or distortion of reality. This is what we do. This is what leads us to all types of disease. Going back to the diagram, there are 3 levels of illness. Theomania, this arrogance that leads a person to schizophrenia or manic-depressive psychosis, which leads to epilepsy and eventually leads to more serious disease. Then there is a medium level of sickness, that of envy, which shows up as neurosis, physical illnesses. And a simpler neurosis, we can say, this also exists, which is when the individual bursts into anger or rage over something, and then it passes. This is more at a level of the simpler physical illnesses. Then take a look again. There was a deviation from consciousness. I'd like to show you a different chart that shows a mistake of Freud's, a theoretical mistake. Look at the diagram here. A Kepian diagram of metaphysics. So this triangle here would represent the iceberg in the ocean where Freud, Jung, and other psychotherapeutic writers think that all illness and health comes from this part down here, down inside here where the arrow is. This is where we have the arrogance, envy, gluttony, laziness, etc. This is where these things are. And they're pretty much hidden there. So using our will, we hide our arrogance, we hide our envy and our defects through the use of a mask. It's the mask that we show to the world. So it's not an unconscious. It's an attitude of inconscientization. Look at the bottom there. The individual wants to hide who he is, and he becomes sick because of this. So we come to the question of hypocrisy. The individual who hides what he is a hypocritical individual. And now take a look at another chart, that a person's conduct is either turned toward himself or toward the divine being. Up here we have the triangle of sickness, which is formed by love, reason, and by the will. When did the human being decide to put the will in first place? Free will was introduced in the 11th and 12th centuries by English authors, John Scott, and mainly William of Ockham. He began to put free will as a basic element so that the individual would be free. But what is freedom? Kant always said that freedom is for the individual who wants to do evil, that the individual wants to be free to do evil. If not, then why would one want to be free? Notice the great geniuses, those with great capacity, the incredible personalities, the most productive individuals. They are so absorbed in their work that they even have those time lapse. Someone comes in and he doesn't notice that the person entered, or he forgets to have lunch, to eat, or to leave. He becomes like Edison, who worked with Tesla, that famous American physicist. He was so engrossed in his work, in his lab, that he would forget to go home and sleep. Sometimes these great inventors spend the entire night working. Today, the human being has put his free will, which is sick, up above everything else. So now, returning to the chart, let's take a look again. The lower triangle is the divine triangle, which is the union of love, which is revelation, reason, which is also a type of revelation, but a more human revelation, and beauty, which is aesthetics. So instead of the will being at the top, what is more important is beauty, the beauty that an individual brings. Beauty is the balance of forms, that which is seen as pleasing. For example, classical music. True music is classical music. Why now is rock or modern music being treated as though this were a better music? Because of envy. Why do we want to put bad photos, distorted paintings, all types of these ugly elements above the classical, for example? Because of envy. Now let me show you a very famous writer and great theologian, Thomas of Aquinas, who spoke about human happiness. Look here. What makes a human being unhappy? And what road leads him to happiness? And so Aquinas asks, firstly, is it wealth that gives human beings happiness? Wealth more in terms of money. He said, well, how could inferior things like money and jewels, emeralds, diamonds, property, all of these things that are inferior to the human being, how could these inferior things make the human being happy? It can't. Through reason we know this, you see. It's not only through revelation. Secondly, he said, would it be through glory? The honored individual, the person who is well-seeing because he has power, would he be a happy individual? Aquinas said no, he wouldn't. Why not? Because the glory a person gains is make-believe, artificial. What the individual has today can end tomorrow, and which of course happens. The individual isn't honored for the rest of his life, even if he holds the greatest positions in society. Thirdly here, take a look. Does happiness come from power? And just look at what Aquinas said. One can't be happy with power because he has to use it for the good of others. Power can't be used for one's own well-being, so he can't be happy with the misuse of power that he has. If a person is happy with this, or better, full of himself and power, it's because he's some type of crook. He uses others to get into power so that he can then take advantage of others. But a person who is in power is supposed to be there to serve the people and not make people serve him. A person in power has to create laws for the good of the people and not for his own good, you see. If an individual is in power and uses it for himself, he can't be allowed to stay in power. Let's see now, fourthly, does happiness come from health? He said it can't because health is inconsistent. Fifthly, does it come from the senses? He said no, because senses are grossly inferior. How can an individual be happy, for example, in eating lots of food, eating and eating all the time? On the contrary, he will end up by destroying his own body. Or those who don't eat. It's the same type of thing. Or how can a person be happy with just having money, but inside the person is empty? He's full of money, but empty in his intelligence. This is an idiot, then. Very rich people are very stupid because of this. Or sex. Can a person be happy through sex? Of course not, because sex is also a sensorial element and is inferior. So one can only be happy through culture and well-being. And take a look at what Aquinas said in sixth place. Happiness comes from the Spirit. And to end our program, I would like to show you a sentence to contemplate.